also realized that this was not specific to the nuclear energy industry, but rather the consequence of the way work was organized in general to very quickly create, a new branch of technology that the national economy needs. This was the way work on the construction sites was organized. Inconsistency in different types of production, say the production of fuel elements, the machine building equipment, the unwillingness of builders to accept this equipment on time, the littering of construction sites, constant incomprehensible changes in the number of construction staff. By construction, I mean at nuclear power plants, at times too many and sometimes too few. Also, the work, so to say, is progressing on the station, then abruptly stops, because one piece of equipment or another is not there yet. All this taken together was very unpleasant and at the same time hardly unique or specific to the nuclear energy industry alone. That is why the words of Nikolai Ivanovich Ryzhkov should be understood in a much wider context. And when I visited the Chernobyl station after the accident and saw what was happening there, I myself drew a precise and unambiguous conclusion. The Chernobyl disaster was an apotheosis, the peak of all the mismanagement that has been carried out for decades in our country. Of course, what happened at Chernobyl has real, not abstract culprits to blame. We already know now that the reactor's protection control system had a defect in it, and many scientists knew this and they proposed ways to fix this defect. The chief designer, not wanting to do any quick additional work, was in no hurry to change the protection control system. Also, there are of course specific culprits. What went on at the Chernobyl station itself for many years, conducting experiments for which the plans were made very carelessly and sloppy. Before conducting the experiments, there were no simulations of possible situations. The situations were not walked through and played out. What will happen if there is a protection malfunction? What will happen if the process does not execute as planned? How should the staff react in one situation or the other? Can the reactor be left running when the steam supply to the turbine is stopped? And if this is done, what could happen if the main circulation pumps are switched on? Common sense would suggest that all these cases had to be simulated before the experiment, be it this particular one or any other. But of course, nothing of the kind was done. There was an absolute disregard of the viewpoint of the chief designer or the science supervisor. Speaking of the conversations with Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev while in Chernobyl, I spoke with him 3 times on the phone. This was rather odd. He, of course, would call the second deputy of the government commission, Comrade Silaev Ivan Stefanovich, or maybe he would call Sherbina and talk to him, but this was not in my presence. But sometimes, when we were at Silaev's, there were calls from Gorbachev. Ivan would tell him his point of view, and then, when more detailed, specific technical information was needed, he would ask, "To whom should I give the phone, Velikov or Legasov?" And in his first call, he said, "Give the phone to Legasov." So I started talking to him. He, Mikhail Gorbachev, spoke for 2 or 3 minutes. "What is going on there? I'm very concerned about this problem. Already the name of Gorbachev is being tarnished all over the world because of this accident, and mass hysteria has begun. What is the real situation there?" In response to this, I outlined the situation for him, that basically as it was after the 2nd of May. The call was around the 4th or 5th of May. The radiation emissions from the destroyed block have ceased, and the situation is currently under control. The scale of contamination in the areas adjacent to the Chernobyl station, as well as the scale of contamination around the world, is more or less known. It was already clear to us that the victims of radiation damage, except for those who worked at the time of the Chernobyl accident, are unlikely to be expected. That the population is being carefully monitored, and that if the countries that received some radioactive fallout as a result of the accident take the right information and sanitary measures, then there will be no real consequences for human health. This is what I said to Mikhail Gorbachev on the 6th of May, not knowing that on the same day a session of the World Health Organization, specially assembled about this issue, had come to the same conclusion: that the accident did not pose any threat to the people in Western Europe and other countries. I also talked about a specific situation where the heavily contaminated areas were, where the situation was more or less favorable, and how the work was progressing. He was satisfied with this conversation. The next day, when we were at Ivan Stefanovich Silaev's office again, the phone rang once more, and this time he asked for the phone to be given to Evgeny Pavlovich Velikov. He began to ask him about the reasons for the accident, but Evgeny Pavlovich started giving very confusing explanations, and then quickly said that Valery Legasov will explain this better, and handed the phone over to me. Perhaps I was too generous with the details, but I did explain why this accident had occurred. And at that moment, Mikhail Gorbachev asked me to write a personal letter to him. And what surprised me was that I, specifically, had to send a letter about what had happened and what had to be reported. So I immediately sat down to write this letter, and after a few edits by Ivan Stefanovich Silaev, it was sent to Gorbachev that same night, signed by Silaev, Velikov, and me. Ivan Stefanovich Silaev, during his term, paid the most attention to the construction work, arranging the concrete factories, arranging the shipment of concrete, because it was clear to him that the area around the first block had to be placed under concrete as much as possible. He was very angry with Makuhin, the first deputy minister of energy and electrification, who, it seemed to him, was working slowly, and he even made a quick decision to fire him. This decision didn't actually go through, but the words were said. It was Ivan Silaev who introduced the system of monetary rewards for doing the most dangerous tasks. And the most dangerous tasks during his term were to determine whether or not there was water inside the upper and lower bubblers and in the rooms beneath the reactor hall, because this was crucial. We were worried that some of the molten fuel would get there and possibly lead to powerful vaporization, which will carry out additional radioactivity. And we had to know whether those bubblers were empty or not. After that, we had to decide whether to leave them empty or to fill them with special concrete. So Ivan Stefanovich Silaev had to tackle all these issues. It was quite hard to get to those bubblers because the adjacent corridors were flooded with water from the time when they were trying to cool down the reactor with water. The levels of radioactivity in that water were quite high, and extremely high in some places, and at certain points in time. The pumping devices were turned on, and this water was pumped out. And yet, the gate valve that needed to be opened to determine if there was water inside the bubblers was opened by one of the station workers in very difficult conditions. So in the evening, Ivan Stefanovich solemnly thanked him and gave him a package with 1,000 rubles. He had obtained the necessary permission for it. And I saw the face of that man, who on the one hand was very proud that he had managed to do this difficult task in such difficult conditions, However, on the other hand, it was plain to see how he crumpled that package of money, not like a prize. Basically, it was uncomfortable for him to refuse this money, but at the same time, the cash form of the prize itself did not really please him. Probably because indeed, especially during that period, people who fought with this accident sought to do their best, to do everything they could, without thinking about any kind of encouragement, be it material or moral. Everyone worked as a single collective, attempting to find the best solution. During these times, it was frightening to look at Comrade Conviz. He was from the Hydro project and the chief engineer of the station. Because I think he never slept, not for a minute. And naturally, to find out how to access various rooms, everyone turned to him, either to his drawings or simply to his memory and his experience. Here I recall many such annoying episodes. You would look at the drawings and see an open corridor. You would start moving along this corridor and suddenly run into a wall. The wall was obviously built there because of some engineering considerations after the project was completed. It was not in the design, but it was there and not shown in any of the drawings. There were reverse cases as well, when, say, where should have been a wall, according to the drawings, in reality was a doorway. We encountered such cases as well. It was particularly hard for the miners because beneath the station territory, a large number of pipes and plates were buried in the ground. And so, when they worked using their tunneling shield or something similar, their way would appear to be clear when looking at underground utility drawings. But when they began their work, they constantly ran into obstacles that were not shown in the drawings. There were a lot of inconsistencies between the part of the documentation that was at the station and the reality in various places of the station and underground facilities. All this certainly gave an impression of gross neglect, of gross sloppiness towards maintaining documentation which should be accurate and describe the state of building structures, walkways, and electrical communications at every moment in time. Unfortunately, we came across this sloppiness quite often. At the same time, I want to highlight the fact that although these things are irritating, when faced day after day, at that moment the people were so determined, they so wanted to complete their work, that all these past cases of sloppiness did not cause any fuss or outcry. All this receded into the background in front of the will to tackle the situation as quickly as possible. The number of people staying at the site was increasing day by day because each group required new assistants who came either with devices or with documents or with work tools that were needed to perform a task. This increase in the number of people required new ways of organizing work because it was no longer possible to personally give specific instructions and be done with it. That is why, after the main problems had been solved, by main I mean protecting people from immediate danger and localizing the disaster itself, came the question of managing all these numerous groups of people who had gathered there at the suggestion of the government commission, according to the decisions of the operative group of the Politburo and the Central Committee, and stayed in ever-increasing numbers, along with their equipment, on the territory of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was necessary to simultaneously organize a number of tasks that were of completely different types. First of all, start the design of the covering that would later come to be called the sarcophagus. This design had to be done concurrently at the site and in different design organizations located in cities across the Soviet Union, mainly Moscow and Leningrad. It was necessary to immediately work on zone-wise decontamination, following the guideline of going from the most contaminated areas to the less contaminated ones. It was necessary to carry out a survey of the territory, to continue this reconnaissance, and to check how radioactivity was being spread by the wind. It was necessary to tackle the issue of checking the equipment in the first and second blocks, of checking the remaining structure and equipment in the third block. It was necessary to assess the condition of all the rooms and areas on the entire Chernobyl station, its surrounding areas and roads. It was necessary to accommodate the army divisions, as well as the various construction organizations that had arrived to help solve the situation. A proper management system had to be established for scientific research, design, and execution of projects across all these diverse areas of work. The management system for this complex mechanism was established gradually. The first two groups, led by Boris Yevdokimovich Sherbina and Ivan Stefanovich Silaev, were occupied exclusively with the most important and urgent tasks. Thanks to the arrival of Comrade Voronin, the overall scheme of work management had started to form. A procedure for ordering materials was established already. It became clear that one group of researchers had to work solely on the tasks related to the fourth block, while another would tackle its surrounding area. The third group, implementers, not researchers, these were mostly the army divisions. They began decontaminating the rooms in the first and second block, and also prepared for the construction of the sarcophagus, because the design was already in progress in Moscow. Comrade Voronin was replaced with Yuri Nikich Maslyukov, and during this time a lot of work was done to build new premises, new villages for the evacuees. The treatment of roads had begun, and the initial preparations started in front of the fourth block for the construction of the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus itself had not yet been begun, but the approaches to it had already been concreted. The most contaminated areas had either been cleared or concreted for the builders to begin their work on the sarcophagus construction. When Comrade Gusev came to the site with his team, the main design elements were being sketched out. It had already been decided to assign the construction of the sarcophagus to SU-605, a department in the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, and that a thorough assessment of the internal condition of the fourth block had to be carried out, of the structural soundness of its remaining building, so that the project could rely on some analysis on some verified data. And when Comrade Vedernikov and his team replaced Gusev, the construction of the sarcophagus had already begun. Moreover, particularly under Vedernikov, with the participation of the group leader from the Institute of Nuclear Energy, Comrade Tutnov, a decision was taken that made the construction of the sarcophagus easier and quicker. Because originally the plan was to build a dome made entirely of concrete over the wreckage. However, calculations showed that the time needed for the construction of the sarcophagus could be significantly reduced if the concrete dome, the reliability of which was being questioned, whether the design would hold its weight, is replaced by, so to speak, a pipe run. The pipe system of roof support would protect the sarcophagus against the possibility of radioactive dust being carried out. However, more radiation would escape through this top cover, but it would be comparable to, or even less, than the total radiation on the site. The correct decision was made during the time of Comrade Vedernikov. And gradually, the following framework of work organization emerged. It came down to this research group from the Institute of Nuclear Energy, together with experts such as Yuri Vasilievich Svinchev, Anatoly Mikhailovich Polevoy, and Tutnov. A lot of work was done, but Comrade Boris Grigorievich led this group. Also, research groups under which a lot of work was done were led by Kulakov and Borovoy. They had to, and this was their primary objective, thoroughly investigate the premises of the fourth block. Firstly, find the fuel, determine how it was distributed. Secondly, install the maximum number of sensors that would ascertain the condition of the fourth block. Here, I need to pay tribute to Comrade Skekalov, the expert from the Institute of Nuclear Energy, and also to the experts from the Ukrainian Institute of Nuclear Research, who made great efforts to find the appropriate paths, put in the necessary sensors, and stretch cables to them. As for neutron sensors, they were the responsibility of the Central Science Research and Project Institute of the Ministry of Media Machine Building. The experts from the institute were led by Comrade Zernov. Generally, one of their tasks was to put various sensors in the fourth block for measuring gamma fields, neutron fields, measuring temperature, measuring airflow, measuring the hydrogen concentration, should it suddenly appear in the system. These sensors were placed in various spots. This was dangerous and hard work because they had to go inside the block every time and search for the most suitable spots that would reliably diagnose the condition of the fourth block.